Hey guys, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Politics of Podcast. I just want to give you a heads up and a content warning. We're going to be discussing some very serious issues, including sexual assault, sexual harassment and rape in this episode. So please bear that in mind as you continue watching.
And I felt a hand go around my waist and I sort of turned around and went, "What are you doing?" And this famous person who was also a contributor on the show, and I made a complaint about it to the person who was running the show that I'd just been on talking about violence against women and girls, and they went, "It's what he's like."
The radicalisation follows the same step-by-step process that I saw with ISIS.
I talk to 14-year-olds who go, men are toxic, and I don't want their influence in my life.
Women needing to be protected by white men against foreign nationals, which again is shrouded not only in obvious racism but misogyny, because it's like there are women.
What the right have done quicker than the left is united people by saying it's the immigrants.
Hello everybody, welcome to the Politics of Podcast. I'm Ali Milani.
And I'm Zoe Grunewald.
We've basically got like an Avengers setup of my favourite women. So over to Zoe.
That's nice. Okay, I'm leading this week. Okay, so this week we're going to be talking about women and girls, and we're going to be asking, is Britain in the midst of a growing crisis? From policing to parliament to princes and the online radicalisation of young men, there does seem to be a growing sense that something's going badly wrong. And we'll be joined by two brilliant guests to help us unpack it all. We've got broadcaster and campaigner Nicola Thorp, and we've got mental health advocate, author and LBC host Natasha Devon. Thanks, guys.
Thank you for having us.
But should we check in first before we...
Yeah, I got a fun fact about Nicola. I told you this upstairs. Natasha, you haven't heard this. Nicola came up, so I'm always going to remember her for the rest of my life, because she came up with where I gave my wife's engagement ring to her. So we had picked out the ring and all that sort of stuff had been set up beside, but my wife was very keen on me like doing like a mini speech and giving her the ring, if that makes sense. And we were both doing hair and makeup, I think, in Talk TV.
Yeah.
And Nicola was like, "Oh my!" We were talking about it because my wife didn't know at the time that it was going to be in Japan. We were going in Japan. And what did you say? Kyoto Gardens, right?
Yeah,
Like,
I remember showing you on my phone.
Yeah, you were like, "This is what it looks like," and then that's where I did it because it didn't require much independent thought from me.
So you are forever
so
entwined.
I know,
Yes.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that so much.
Yeah.
I feel, a part of your story.
Anytime I see you on my feed, I'm like,
You
got
better
some
not
good
do
ideas.
anything
Yeah.
cancelable now, Nicola, because otherwise you'll ruin their
Yeah,
life.
it'd be very embarrassing.
then I have to take the ring back and
Re-propose.
How you guys doing? How's life?
Yeah, good. Really good. I have a 1-year-old, which is the sort of focus of my attention, and balancing that with everything, which is, tricky, especially when at nursery everyone's got hand, foot and mouth disease. So we're constantly on a lookout to
What
check
is
if
that?
she's... Well, exactly. I thought foot and mouth was solely for cows. Or livestock. No, it's for children too. And so we're constantly getting emails from nursery saying, "Can you check your child's hands and feet and mouths to make sure that they're not
Oh my God.
contagious?"
I do hear that like when you have kids, that's when you get the most sick because they go to nursery. And they
Yeah,
pick
I
up
mean, you
everything,
can
right?
hear the sort of, I've got a bit of a cold at the moment, and I always lay that at it's just constant sickness. So I'll stay away from Natasha.
But aside from that, you've got some exciting career news.
Yeah, I do. A podcast series that I've been working on for 3 years is out on Thursday, 30th of October. And it's an investigative series about a girl who went missing from my hometown in Blackpool 22 years ago. And she's never been found. And her story has been mired in controversy, false rumours, and a trial of 2 men who were eventually acquitted. Now, most people, when you say the name Charlene Downs, might think of the horrible headlines that kind of followed the initial trial into her murder, because the police said that these 2 men who were Middle Eastern takeaway owners had killed Charlene and disposed of her body by turning her into kebab meat. And that is a cruel nickname was given to her, Kebab Girl. That's what I knew when I was growing up. We were all told about Kebab Girl and stay away from that kebab shop and da-da-da. But Google it right now and it's there in the headlines. This is what the police said had happened to her. But it didn't. And in fact, in this series, it's the first time that the police confirm that categorically did not happen to her, that the evidence that they collected did not exist. It is false. But as you can imagine...
So had it been falsified? Or were they just late? So is it incompetence or was there conspiracy?
It's a mix of both, and you'll have to listen to the podcast to find out, genuinely. And that's a big part of why I wanted to do the series, was not just to kind of put to bed that rumour, but to also rehumanise Charlene, because she's been reduced to a piece of meat, essentially, in a headline. We do cover a lot of different themes in the series: classism, misogyny, racism, and police corruption, because there was an awful lot of cover-up and terrible behaviour of the police, not just in terms of the trial itself, but the way in which they collected information from victims of grooming. And grooming is really at the heart of Charlene's story as well. And we try and report on that in a really sensitive way, and making sure that victims, because it wasn't just Charlene who was victimised in that way, but other victims have come forward for the first time, and making sure that they're at the centre of that story.
Well, a lot of those topics I think we'll cover in the broader thing, so it'll be interesting to hear how you guys covered that in the story. For everyone watching or listening online, we'll put a link to the podcast in the description. So go and listen. By the time this has come out, the podcast is out now.
Yeah, the
so
first
as
2
you're listening to
episodes
this,
will be
it's
out.
So whether you're listening on your podcast platforms or on YouTube, the link's down below. Natasha, how are you doing? You're my favourite LBC presenter, you know.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
By a long margin.
That's really kind. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm good. I'm halfway.
You were abroad when we connected. You were doing stuff abroad, which sounded really cool, right?
So I went to Jersey and I did a social media workshop for every young person on the island from the ages of 7 to 18, which was about 7,000 young people. So I did 22 workshops over 4 days. And
that's a lot of work.
it was a lot, but you know what? Because I normally work with teenagers. When I'm not on LBC, I do work in schools and colleges with 14 to 18-year-olds. So when I was working with the DFE over in Jersey, we used my teenage workshop as a template, and we were trying to make it applicable to the younger age groups. And when I was saying, you know, this is for a 7-year-old, I'll take that bit out, they were going, no, leave it in, they'll get it. I was so shocked by how many 7-year-olds have a smartphone, how many of them are on TikTok and Snapchat, how many of them have seen pornography. It was a
7 years
real,
old?
eye-opener for me.
I have no concept of children's ages. They can walk at 7.
Yeah. Yeah, they can walk and ask questions like, how will AI affect copyright law? Oh, my Lord. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Wow.
So 7, they're what year group were they in?
Year 5.
Oh, that's quite old. Whoa.
Year
Really?
4 or 5, yeah.
Whoa.
I got a phone when I was like 11, but it was a brick. It was like one of the, it had an antenna, and you could send 10 text messages. So yeah, God knows what 7-year-olds.
Was that your contract or was that your phone? You could send 10 text messages.
Oh no, it only had the capability to save 10 messages. So once you had 10 texts, you had to delete one.
Or otherwise it didn't come through. Yeah.
That could be a format for a future show.
Yeah.
If you only had 10 texts.
I like that.
Who would what would you keep, or who would you send them to?
That's a good one.
Yeah.
No one. Other than my lovely wife.
Let's begin, shall we?
Yeah.
Let's talk about what's going on with women and girls, because I'm sure we'll all agree that there has always been an issue, for as long as we can remember, with misogyny in public life. I've worked in Parliament since 2018, and when I first joined there as a parliamentary clerk, they were reckoning with this huge report, this Cox report about bullying and harassment in Parliament, and it was quite clear, and this was all around the time of Me Too and everything, when we had this huge societal reckoning across the globe, really, with an element of violence against women and girls, and we know it goes much, much deeper than this. But it feels like we progressed quite quickly with these conversations in quite a short space of time, but it feels to me like a backlash is growing now. And I mean, we'll talk about all these kind of male figureheads and what's happening across the Atlantic with Donald Trump and the misogyny that was around his campaign and around a lot of his policy. But let's just start here in Britain. What in your guys' mind is happening with women and girls here? Do you think we are progressing? Do you think we're going backwards? Where are we at?
Zoe, can I bring you into this conversation as well? Because originally on a different show that we do, we had this woman come on and talk about the risk assessment that police do around domestic violence, and then very soon after that we spoke about Nigel Farage's sort of alleged links to anti-abortion groups. I have to say alleged? I don't know. Let's say alleged so I don't get sued. To anti-abortion groups. And then I kind of went, like, I sometimes feel as like an ethnic minority in the country, like there's such a swamp of like negativity coming your way. And then I thought the same must be true of women, because there's things that like, there's topics that I thought we had settled, like abortion, that are now reopening. I didn't think that was an issue in this country. So yeah, I'd love to also get your view, but everyone's view on, as women in the sort of spotlight and as women in the country, like how do we feel the moment the country's in with all the stuff that Zoe
It feels like there's a huge backlash against quote unquote woke at the moment, and women's rights comes under that umbrella, right? It feels like, yeah, there has been a huge, well, any backlash to anything woke related is an attack on all of us, and it feels like that. Like I put some content out earlier this week on my socials about Graham Linehan and some of his comments. And what was fascinating is just how many people, in the name of women's safety, which is what they claim to care that trans, their interest in trans rights stems from, shouting misogynistic, or shouting, Instagram shouting, capital letters, misogynistic abuse at me. And it feels like it's either team woke or team anti-woke, and being a woman is encapsulated within that. It also struck me, because for years now I've done like commentary on women's rights issues, get asked to do punditry on various different shows. And I sat and thought about it recently. I was like, I actually haven't done anything this year on women's issues, because it's felt like there hasn't been a major women's rights story really this year. And I thought that was interesting, because every year since the Me Too movement, there's always been something, Sarah Everard, these various different cases that the public has captured the public's attention. Doesn't really feel like that's happened this year. And I don't know why.
Do you know what I think the backlash is a result of? And you see this in all kinds of arenas, not just with women, but what we had, I would say around 2015 to 2017 was greater visibility. So we had more female-led art. We had more women talking about their experiences. And there was this kind of growing, that's when Laura Bates really, with her Everyday Sexism project, sort of exploded onto the scene. And you had all of this campaigning work that was being done by women. And then the backlash is the backlash against the visibility. So what you get is, you're talking about abortion rights, which are now, thanks to Farage, up for discussion, apparently, in the UK. You have our structural rights being come for as a result of greater visibility. And it's like, well, hang on, we barely even started in 2017, and you're already you're backlashing against something that hasn't even happened yet,
Yeah.
What about you?
No, I think that's totally true. I mean, in some ways, I remember when I first became aware of feminism when I was a teenager, and I went to an all-girls school, and there was the classic thing that I think lots of girls my age have recognition of, which is a boy at the other school distributing pictures of girls, and the girls getting blamed for that, and the teachers piling in, and the victim blaming, and the slut shaming. And it was, to me, it was extraordinary, because it was so obvious to me that these girls were victims, but the way they were treated by the people who were supposed to look after them, like they themselves were sex offenders, or they themselves had brought this behaviour on. And that kind of radicalised me, because I thought, what's going on? I can't understand how they can be the ones being blamed for this. And that really set me on this path of, I guess, my feminist journey. I remember going to university and feeling like, now that teachers are becoming more aware of smartphones and the dangers that was putting young people in, that actually it felt to me like schools were aware of this, and they had started to change their attitudes to all this kind of thing. We had legislation as well about revenge porn, upskirting, this understanding that there is a modern digital equivalent of these sexual crimes. And that really enthused me. But it feels like rapidly over the past, I guess since we've seen the emergence of Trump again, but just women's rights being up for debate, politicians saying things like, I wouldn't want a female police officer, just quite openly. I mean, we'll talk about this, but the kind of narratives around that the far right use around women needing to be protected by white men against foreign nationals, which again is shrouded not only in obvious racism but misogyny, because it's like there are women. So this whole Tommy Robinson thing, our women are not halal meat. And it just seems to me how quickly...
Wait, what was that? Women aren't halal.
Tommy Robinson said our women are not halal meat.
That's crap. That's the first time I've heard that.
Oh,
Yeah,
really?
me too.
Yeah,
Really.
extraordinary. But just how quickly all these narratives are seeping back in, and it feels like we just take one step forward and two steps backwards.
So from originally when I conceptualized this episode, I wasn't going to be in it. So I thought, and then Zoe was like, no, that's the whole point.
The whole point. You need a man.
A guy like. Also, when we talk about the radicalization of men as well, I think it's a learning opportunity for me. But would you all say that we've, let's say, since Me Too exploded, and there seemed to be general consensus at the time, are we taking a step back, do you think?
I don't know if we've taken a step back.
But there's backlash.
Yeah, there's backlash. I think we've probably become more people have become more aware of those issues, but at the same time there are structures in place, power structures, that means that the very people who have committed acts that we were talking about in Me Too, in the Me Too movement, are now leading the free world.
Because there's all this conversation about cancel culture.
Yeah.
But I mean, Andrew's still living in his lodge.
Yes.
Right.
Trump's in power.
By the way,
Trump's president.
The story that no one seemed to pick up on, BBC ran the story that Tony Blair, while Prime Minister, met with Epstein. Right. BBC
really?
reported that.
Yeah.
Didn't see that anywhere.
No.
Like some of the stuff regularly coming out of Reform, none of these people are actually getting cancelled. They get rewarded. Like Tony Blair, that comes out and then he gets to
And then
write a Gaza deal.
I imagine that for some people, I haven't pre-thought this through, so I'm just spitballing here. But I imagine that the average newspaper reader or TV viewer is going, okay, so I've learnt that all of this behaviour is bad. But I'm also seeing Donald Trump on the front page of everything, and we know that he was found civilly liable for sexual assault, but he's getting a state visit to the UK, unprecedented second state visit. Why do I need to behave in a way that is better than this man who's getting all the bells and whistles and has been invited into this country? And I imagine that there could be some sort of bitterness, resentment and backlash going, well, if this is how this guy gets treated, why do I need to behave in any way better than him? And people or men might feel a bit angered by that. But, you've got Starmer on one hand saying, we must stamp out violence against women and girls. But here we go, Donald, come and visit the Queen.
Just on that Starmer, I always find it really strange that going into the election, Labour we said we were going to reduce violence against women and girls by half. Why don't we eliminate it?
Let's eliminate
What's the ideal amount of violence?
Such a weird,
What's the metric?
I mean, I understand that it's like a target but surely the narrative from a campaign messaging point of view is to eliminate it. Sorry, I interrupted.
I was just going to say, I think it's even worse than that. I think it's that people are failing to see that it's all connected. So, like Rory Stewart on Newsnight recently, when he said, why are we talking about allegations against Prince Andrew, things that allegedly happened in 2001? Not understanding that these hugely powerful men who exist outside of the law and thought that they could do whatever they wanted to these women and girls, they're the same sort of people that commit war crimes, and they're in charge now. If you exist outside the law, you exist outside the law in every single capacity. And I think that the fact that we take violence against women and girls and we put it in a little box over here, we never considered that it's related to everything else.
And I agree with all of that. And I was thinking, when was the moment where it felt like things really started to kind of turn? And I think Trump's grab 'em by the pussy, and was never accountable for that, and in fact became president of the United States not once but twice, was that moment where actually you can shout, you can scream, you can campaign, you can break through, but if actually just you can't break through those attitudes at the top, and that man at the top just says, I don't think I did anything wrong, it showed the limits of that power which was so frustrating. And I think you're absolutely right that then people say, well, it must be fine because he's president of the United States. And it's really, really hard to hold anyone accountable for that behaviour after that fact. And I think, if you think of we'll probably get onto, well, we will get onto the kind of intersectionality of it all, but also if you think about Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech, right, there was a feeling that let me just think how I word this. There is latent racism in the British public. There is latent misogyny there. The point of politicians is to uphold the highest standards and to continuously say it is not acceptable in this society. If you have politicians who push and pull at those edges and say, actually, this is okay, and, do you know what, actually, I don't think, and then you allow people.
But I don't think the politicians want those high standards. So I remember this is rumours, right? There were rumours around when Boris was Prime Minister that he did particularly want a high standard of behaviour around his cabinet because he knew that the stuff he had done wouldn't live up to that, if that makes sense. So one of the big things that ended up bringing Boris down was the scandal in which, what was his name? Pincher, yeah.
Pincher by name.
Yeah. And I'm pretty sure, based on the behaviour that I have seen in Parliament, let alone the stuff that has come out, that they probably don't want to raise that bar because they can't meet it. Right? I mean, we've all been in the Palace of Westminster, that grounds. The amount of sexual harassment, sexual abuse, misogyny in that building, I've seen it. So I will say this: I've seen more misogyny and sort of sexual harassment in that building than I've seen anywhere else.
Yeah, I came off doing. I'm trying to sort of run it by legal in my own head. You can cut it if you want. No, I'll leave it very anonymous. I'd come off doing a hit on a TV show about violence against women and girls, and there were some drinks after the show, and somebody was there present, and I felt a hand go around my waist, and I sort of turned around and went, "What are you doing?" And this famous person, who was also a contributor on the show, started talking to me, and I was sort of completely blown away about the fact that he could put his hand around my waist and kind of spin me around like that. And I made a complaint about it to the person who was running the show that I'd just been on talking about violence against women and girls. And they went, "It's what he's like. He's been doing that for years." And it's that little tiny microcosm of like, okay, we can outwardly say this is what we're against, and we will put it on this TV show and we'll discuss it and intellectualize it. But when it literally happens 20 minutes after the show, we're going to do fuck all. Sorry, can I swear?
Yeah.
Okay, fuck all. Because he gets viewers and you're not as important.
Is that all? Like,
have we solved it? Is that
no,
is that everything?
No, I guess my question is, you guys are, so I spoke about the sort of political end in Westminster, but the media, same thing, right? Same sort of behavior. I mean, you've just given an example.
Yeah. Totally. And people will. I find it really interesting. There's loads of broadcasters on various different channels who will rally against diversity, equality, inclusion, but they have their own DEI representative for that company. And so what they put out there is very much, it's a vibe. It's vibe-based politics and broadcasting rather than what they genuinely believe in. And actually, as a company, the majority of these companies have their own DEI representative, and they have somebody who cares about women's safety. They have a HR department. But the broadcasters who are putting it out there, it's all for clicks. It doesn't really matter.
I'm reading Ash Sarkar's book that one of the world's largest arms manufacturers has a DE&I department.
Yeah. I mean, Stonewall recognises BAE Systems as one of their their employees of the year or something. A champion of diversity.
I remember, I do remember there was a huge debate a couple of years ago around Pride, the Pride protest / parade, and things like Barclays and BAE Systems and all these organisations, whether they had a place for it or not, or whether Pride was a protest still, or whether it was a parade. Should we talk about Andrew a little bit?
Yeah, I think we have to talk about
Prince or Tate. Pick your Andrews.
Yes, pick your Andrew. Pick your problematic Andrew. But we should. But I think what we're all touching on there at the top is it has to come from the top down. If the grassroots are great, they can organise. We can all get together and share our stories and talk about the things that have happened to us and the things that have radicalised us and the things that have made us see misogyny and patriarchy. But if you have people at the top only paying lip service, so for example, Keir Starmer I think even hiring Peter Mandelson or appointing Peter Mandelson as ambassador to the US, when he had those links with Epstein, what does that say about what you will tolerate in terms of the behaviour of the people you're putting in senior positions? We
knew everything about
yeah.
his links with Epstein before he was put in place.
And that should be enough. It's not a right to be UK ambassador to the US, okay? That should disqualify you from that.
In fact, it was pretty unprecedented because ambassadorship in the UK is historically non-political. And he actually broke tradition to make a political appointment. And the political appointment was someone who, like you're saying,
Yeah. But having said all that, clearly there are actors like Andrew Tate, for example, and specific individuals who they're not leaders in the traditional sense, but they are taking on that kind of icon role in a men's rights movement. And we should probably touch on the significance of those men and what they mean.
Because, I mean, look, one of the I don't have lived experience of this, but when I see some of the Prince Andrew stuff, when I see some of the stuff that goes on in the Houses of Commons, if I'm a survivor of sexual abuse or sexual harassment or, anything in that field of crimes, I have no faith in the system. Why would I come forward when I see when the most powerful get away with it? Then you go, how can I have faith that my story or my experience will be taken seriously? No.
Yeah, will be believed. Look at the way that Virginia Giuffre was treated. I find it so incredibly tragic that she'd actually eventually escaped her abuse by going all the way to Australia, meeting somebody, falling in love, and kind of putting that history behind her. And it was only when Epstein, I think, had died in prison that she decided, right, I need to tell this story now and I'm going to come forward. No, it wasn't his I can't remember. It was around about the timeline and Prince Andrew doing the Newsnight interview. She had a happy life. She'd moved on, although she lived with this darkness within her from her abuse. But she said, I want to do this and I want to fight this. And look at the way that she was treated. And then obviously eventually ended up taking her own life. And an image like that for somebody who has experienced any kind of sexual violence, for her to have the amount of evidence that she had against Epstein, a convicted child sex offender, and for her still not to be fully believed and doubted, it sends this message to anybody who wants to come forward. I'm still not going to be believed.
And the belief thing is really important because you're absolutely right that I think we are getting to a point where with our discussions around Prince Andrew where the public seem pretty united on this. They don't like the man. They don't trust him. There's always going to be people who will discredit her story and who will stick up for Prince Andrew. But if you look at opinion polls, they're pretty decisive on just the pure fact that he had a relationship with Epstein is enough to want him out of public life and to want the taxpayer to stop funding him. But we know that believing women is something that has just been such a long slog, and obviously there are huge class dimensions to this, and I'm sure we'll touch on grooming gangs a little bit later. But I think there is something so fascinating about what stories society chooses to believe and which ones it chooses to dismiss, and which ones it chooses to dismiss for, the greater good. For example, like your example of, we've just had a conversation on air about how widespread Vogue is, and then I'm harassed or assaulted at a party and it's played down. It's like there's a cognitive dissonance here about violence against women and girls that hits the headline and what it actually looks like in daily life and how that actually does impact women.
It feels like there's a consensus on, yes, violence against women and girls is bad, but there's a reason why we don't say male violence against women and girls, because that's not as palatable for people, because they don't want to accept that it is a male problem.
And teenage boys are terrified of being falsely accused, absolutely terrified. And I've tried to have conversations with them where I'm saying, look, at the moment, the conviction rate for rape is under 3%. If we had a more robust system and if things were investigated properly and you were falsely accused, then if you were found to be innocent, everybody would go, he's innocent. At the moment, because nothing's being investigated properly, it actually, if you were going to make a false accusation, people would go, well, we have no faith that the police have actually followed this through, so it's probably true. So I was trying to impress upon some of the young men that I work with that the situation as it stands harms you as well. If you're genuinely fearful of this thing, you should be over in the woke camp,
I've noticed a trend over the past few years as well, of people on the right, these leaders, as it were, on X or Twitter or whatever, saying that born out of the Me Too movement was this phrase, believe women. They've twisted it to believe all women. Now, nobody from the Me Too movement was ever saying believe all women at any cost and believe that that's all you need in order to prosecute somebody. What it means is believe women at the first instance when they report, and then investigate it and do your due diligence, and either you can prove or disprove that that happened. It doesn't mean just take a woman's word for it. And I've seen this trend on TikTok and Twitter of men going, well, yeah, believe all women is insane. And it's women versus us, and we will never be believed. And that fear-mongering, again from bad actors who know, and they're willfully misinterpreting what believe women actually means.
But then, yeah, I think that's totally right. I also think, though, there does need to be an honest conversation, which I think we're having increasingly with young men, young boys, about what appropriate sexual behaviour looks like, right? Because I think every woman I know would have a story of being assaulted or harassed or coerced or manipulated or whatever it is. Not all of it might meet a threshold for assault, but every woman has a story. And if every woman has a story, then it can't just be one man doing all those. We know that there needs to be proper discussions about what consent looks like, what healthy relationships look like, what abuse, what assault. There must be a way we can have those conversations without making men feel defensive and divided, right? I mean, it's a difficult subject to broach, but there must be a way we can do it which feels constructive for both sides.
I agree. And what the right have done quicker than the left is united people by saying it's the immigrants. They've jumped in way before anyone on the left could do that. It's like, no, we will involve you in this conversation because we don't think you would abuse women because you're white British and it's them. And they've managed to very successfully galvanise a group of men who are feeling disenfranchised and blamed for something and go, well, I could never do this because it's those guys, not these guys, those guys.
Yeah, I guess the story that the right have successfully told is, yes, there is a problem of violence against women and girls, but it's been imported from alien cave cultures in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Or Africa.
I think as well that the issue with teenage boys is because of where they are in their development, they can be quite black and white in their thinking. Because I think when it comes to what you can and can't say to any group of people, you know the difference between somebody who uses a word and they don't quite know, but they're coming, with love in their heart and genuine curiosity. You can tell, right? Whereas when somebody is using it as a slur or being disrespectful, you can tell by tone. That's a very difficult thing to convey to a teenager because they're like, is it this or this? Am I allowed to say that or not? And then when you try and have the conversation, they feel like they're being dictated to a lot of the time. So it is difficult to kind of lay it out for them.
How much of that, my question, I'm really curious to get your guys' perspective on, essentially, I guess, Zoe, what you've just asked. When you're talking about these issues, like very serious issues that affect women, you want to be able to tell your perspective and story in 100% honest way. Do you at all go through a filter of how, I need to convince men at all?
Yeah.
Or no? You do?
Yeah, 100%.
When if I'm doing an interview on like Muslim stuff or race stuff, right? In my head, I go, how do I explain this in a way where a white audience watching will understand the perspective, if that makes sense? But then I also go through that internal thing of, I have to be able to tell the truth in terms of that perspective. So I wonder how much of that goes through you guys'
use a filter when speaking to women about it too.
Right.
There's an experience from my past where I reported a behaviour of a certain individual, and because he was very well liked amongst a group of women and men, I almost found myself having to justify it more to the women than the men. I don't think it's exclusive to men that you put on this filter. I think it's just as a victim generally of this kind of behaviour, you end up telling the story in a way that is the most sort of palatable to that other person. And then maybe the next time you tell the story to somebody who you do feel more comfortable with, that story changes a bit. Not the details of what happened, but the kind of the way in which you tell it.
The sharpness.
Of it. And then that can be used against you in future when you say, well, you changed that aspect of your story. And that's something that's not just anecdotal. That is something that is found across the board for victims who report. And people report in different ways at different times and to different audiences. It's definitely not just men that I filter myself for.
Yeah, and I think part of that is to do with what we were talking about earlier with there is this narrative that sexual violence is this, it's women being dragged off the streets and being assaulted, or it's, it's something horrible that hits the front pages. Not that it is an everyday, daily occurrence that, it happens all the time.
And it's far more likely, from my understanding, to happen
From a
someone
partner.
you know.
Yes,
or a
yeah,
partner,
and quite often, women maybe don't always register that what has happened to them is abuse or violence in the first place, because it's someone they love and trust, and they have been led to believe that they're not ever going to be a victim of that, because why would someone who loves them and is their family member do something like that to them? But you're absolutely right, most abuse occurs in the home, and it is a partner or former partner or family member. And I think having those conversations is so important to be able to actually have a frank and honest conversation about what violence against women and girls look like.
And those conversations, as a guy, right, so my eyes were far more opened on this issue, less than any podcast I watch or any TV, but actually women I knew talking to me about it. So a lot of my perspective, and folks will know, if you Wikipedia me, you'll know this, right? So I used to have very different views when I was like a teenager, because I grew up in a sort of, I'm not going to go through the story again, but like my perspective on the sort of lived experience of women really changed when I met women at university who explained to me things, opened my eyes to perspectives that I would have never seen. And it's still changing. Like when I got married and my wife would come home with keys in her fingers, right? I'd be like, it does not occur to me that level of a fear of like inevitable violence is in a woman's mind just walking the street home when it's dark. Maybe sometimes not even when it's dark, right? So while a lot of the information campaigns are so important, my perspective is, at least in my experience, my mind was changed by people I knew, right? People I interacted with at school, at university, at work, that sort of stuff. So a lot of, more of that need to happen?
Well, and this is where we're encountering
like talk to people you already know.
Yeah, but there's another issue now that's happening in my experience with teenagers, is that they are converging by gender, and this is happening is partly because of technology, that we're all in our own silos, but it's also because a lot of young women have reached a point where they're saying, do you know what, I talk to 14-year-olds who go, men are toxic, and I don't want their influence in my life, and they actively seek to, unless they're related to them, to cut boys and men out of their life. So you have this kind of siloing, a really unhelpful, like, I get it, I understand why a lot of teenage girls feel that way, but you have this siloing of the sexes that is happening, so that a young man going to university now might not even get that experience that you had.
Term is, I grew up watching radicalisation happen of young Muslim men who not a lot, but I knew people who went to Syria. I knew people who joined ISIS, right? And I watched them get radicalised. And the same thing is happening. The radicalisation follows the same step-by-step process that I saw with ISIS, but now, instead of it being some sort of radical religious preacher on the other end of the video, it's Andrew Tate, right? It's Jordan Peterson. And so we're watching the radicalization, I think, of young men who are probably between the ages of, like, I would say 11 to 16, who are consuming content from the likes of Andrew Tate and his brother Tristan and Jordan Peterson, and there's a lot of them out there. And there does seem, in my view at least, to be this dearth between men and women, particularly young men and women.
I wanted to ask you actually, Natasha, because I know you do a lot of work with young people. Are we overstating Andrew Tate's influence, or is it really, because I don't know any teenage boys that like well, I do, but I don't talk to them about what they're watching online.
Yes, we are. Right,
Yeah.
so I have a lot to say about this.
Okay.
At the height of his popularity in 2017, only 3 in 10 teenage boys thought that Andrew Tate was a good role model. Now, 3 in 10 is too many. 3 in 10 is enough to make every girl in their school's lives a misery. It's 30%. It's statistically significant. But if you were reading the press coverage at the time, you would have thought it was 100%. And it's the same with, there was this nonsense poll that was done by Channel 4 and Kraft, which has since been thoroughly debunked, that said that 52% of Gen Z want to live under dictatorship. Have endless investigations into the young men
ludicrous.
It's stupid. It's about 6%. The King's College London did a proper study, and it's about 6%.
We could. You should do an entire episode on that one particular study and the way in which it was worded and misreported.
Absolute bollocks, yeah. And then you've got all of these endless investigations. Why are so many young men drawn to reform? When actually more young women are joining the Green Party than young men are joining reform. So what I would say in my experience, you're looking at about a quarter who are attracted to that sort of thing. And I just think for the 3/4 of teenage boys and young men who, they've all seen it, of course, because their feeds are absolutely flooded with it, but have gone, do you know what? I don't like this. I'm going to do something a bit more clever and sophisticated and reject this type of rhetoric. It must be very frustrating to see your entire generation painted that way.
Because it also strikes me that we spend a lot of time talking about the radicalisation of young men, when actually it is the middle-aged men who have been radicalised, who are bringing the world to its knees. If you think about Trump, Netanyahu,
not even middle-aged, near death.
It's the older men. It's the older men. Elon Musk.
We're going to create this new
Elon Musk.
new grouping of men, near death men.
Yeah, near death men. Elon Musk, who's been radicalised by his own platform and who can do untold damage and is doing untold damage. Yet we spend so long talking about young men and boys.
Because young men tend to be more liberal than older men, right?
When you look at the YouGov polling, if you look at young people as an entire group and don't write out the young women, which for some reason is what was happening before, by far the most popular party is the Green Party. And there's a lot of evidence to show that Gen Z are even more progressive than millennials. But there was this narrative for a long time. I don't know whether it was to try and make Farage sexy. And the other interesting thing, speaking of Nigel Farage, is that when I talk to teenage boys about who do like reform, why they like reform, they say, well, I don't really. It's Trump I like, but that's the closest thing. Wow. So it's not even that Nigel Farage is popular, it's that they love Donald Trump.
And you've been saying this for ages, right? Because so many news outlets were going, reform, attracting the young people are moving to reform. And you were just like banging that drum going, they're not.
They're not.
And all of the polling that's come out recently is going, no, they're going to Green. But they want to, I think it's because Farage does well on TikTok. Ergo, young people love Farage. The middle-aged people that I know, near-death people, near-death men, have rejected sites like Instagram and are getting their news from TikTok. I do Vox Pops all the time. Recently did loads of Vox Pops in my hometown in Blackpool. Where'd you get your news from? TikTok. And this is older men. And I was like, oh my God, of course. This is where you're being radicalised. So we think that online radicalisation, like you say, is just for younger people. It's not. It's the middle-aged and near-death men who are rejecting mainstream media, rejecting anything that falls under the umbrella of Ofcom, and are finding it all on TikTok, which is why they care about Trump more, because...
Okay, so I'm going to start talking about the radicalisation of near-death men.
Yeah, and I actually, you know how I feel about.
Zoe's got this whole thing about pensioners. So we won't get
but
Zoe hates pensioners.
But okay. I do find it, and I'm sure my stepdad won't mind me saying this, but I actually got commissioned to write a piece about the radicalisation of middle-aged men, and I joked to my stepdad, can I talk to you? Because I sent him an article, and not even to him, on the family group chat about wood-burning stoves causing loads of deaths. He sent me like paragraphs and paragraphs back being like, this study is false, it's not true. And I was like, I think you're spending too much time sat at home scrolling your phone. We're talking about how loads of young people are doing that, but I don't even know where he's getting the information from. It's not cited. And there's a lot, I was just going to say, there's a lot of digital literacy that's been put into young people, but older people who, haven't grown up with the technology, you do see that sometimes, we've seen it with Facebook, a lot of misinformation can spread and those sources aren't always checked. So I think we should, I'm not saying, that is like, we should minimise the radicalisation of young people, but I don't think we should ignore the fact that people of all ages can be radicalised by social media, and can take against wood burning stoves in a slightly unhinged way.
It does feel to me. I did see someone, and this isn't new. I think everybody's seen it, which kind of talked about, particularly with near-death men, that equality and equity that takes away the privilege they've had all their lives can look like oppression to them. So it's the movement kind of seems like, can I have my privilege back, please?
Yeah, can I take it back? Yeah. Totally.
Should we
I
talk about
I was enjoying that. I was
Yeah, yeah,
enjoying
yeah.
that privilege.
It's
Yeah,
a
yeah,
great
yeah,
time.
Yeah.
We should talk about the far right.
Yeah.
I mean, we've touched on it quite a lot, but we should get into it because obviously you've been covering. Oh, you both, I guess, have been covering the protests, and we were talking earlier about the Pink Ladies.
Yes.
Yeah,
I
which
don't
you
know
are
a
not
lot-
one of.
Yeah, no, I'm not one of. But I went to one of the UKIP, the UKIP protest on Saturday to interview people. I hasten to add, not to support them. And loads of women came up to me because I tend to dress in pink, and they were like, "Are you one of the Pink Ladies?" I was like, "No, but who are the Pink Ladies?" And they sort of explained who they were, and I was like, "Oh,
Who are they?
I am not one of the Pink Ladies." Well, again, their descriptions change because I think members of these groups tend to join for different reasons. But my understanding was that they were a group that were supportive of UKIP from the perspective of women's safety.
They're pick me bitches.
Yeah,
The pick me bitches.
Yeah. You've heard this phrase before, right?
I've heard of pick me, yeah, but I hadn't.
You don't want to say bitches on a podcast with women, do you? It's okay. We give you the
Oh, we
bitch
do.
card.
Oh,
Yeah,
fucking
have the
pick me
bitch card.
bitches.
they were protesting. They've come into the news a lot recently because they were protesting the asylum hotels.
Right. Yeah.
Again, under the guise of caring about violence against women and girls. And what has been really interesting, because it's not a new trope at all. For as long as the far right have been the far right, they have used this narrative that minority, men of colour, foreign nationals, are going after white women, and it's usually white women. And the reason for this is twofold. A, it helps to legitimise their narrative. We just care. We're just concerned citizens. We just care about women's safety. But it also, there is actual systemic reasons why they clearly want to keep the white race pure. So they want to keep the white women for themselves. And it's existed in so many iterations across history. And we're now seeing it really bubbling up again in the UK. Reform UK are using it particularly around this idea of asylum hotels, around this idea of illegal immigration, basically presenting it as a threat to women and girls.
Yeah. I did a cross question with a columnist called Zoe Strimple from The Telegraph. I really recommend watching that episode. A lot happened. But at one point she said, it is more egregious if you are assaulted by somebody who is not a British national. And she said it and I thought, but why is it though? The impact is the same on the victim.
Yes. I guess the overall question, we feel like that women's issues is being hijacked by the far right. Or?
Yeah, totally. I mean, you look at Reform, and I've forgotten the name of the MP that they have, the very few that they have, but having previously been
James
convicted,
McMurdoch, who has now been kicked out of the party, but not for that.
Not for that. No,
something,
kicked out for
something
different
to do with
reasons.
his previous business.
Yeah, precisely. But
they
for
can't
them,
abide that. But
no, but hating women's fine. He was defended repeatedly by Farage, and people can change, people make mistakes, and that is a really attractive prospect for voters who maybe have done things in their own past, nothing as extreme as that perhaps, but have viewed women or spoken about women in that particular way and going, here is a party that allows forgiveness. And I don't know if that really exists in other parties. I would argue that it does in the Greens and various different parties like that, but I don't think that Reform voters see the idea of forgiveness and being accepted for who they are and that they could have made mistakes and perhaps changed in other parties. So they think, oh, Farage would let me join even though I've got this past.
Interesting. So there was that statistic, wasn't there, that 40% of the people that were arrested at the asylum protests had been reported for domestic abuse?
Yes. So yes, it was 41% of the. I've actually got the article in front of me. 899 individuals arrested for taking part in violent disorder, and this was during the riots, had previously been reported to the police for domestic abuse. In some areas, this figure was as high as 68%. And I think this is so key because at the core of white supremacism is also misogyny, because they need women to repopulate the white race. And that is why, going back to that comment made by that Telegraph columnist, the idea that it is okay, or not okay, but more palatable to be assaulted by someone of your own race if you're white, it's because at the core of it, they believe that white women belong to white men. you know? And this idea that Farage cares about women's safety, when at the same time he's been starting to talk about potentially having a debate about rolling back abortion term limits, that he wants to take us out of the ECHR, that he's voting against the Employment Rights Bill, you know, that is supposed to protect you from discrimination and harassment at work. This man is using violence against women and girls as a cover for his ideology, which includes subjugating women, like it includes subjugating minorities, LGBT people, etc. So you know.
Did you see his press, the junket they did yesterday, where he was sat next to one of the victims of child grooming, who was an incredible woman, and she'd stepped back from being involved in the national inquiry and was critical of Jess Phillips and critical of the inquiry itself, which has all come down to sort of logistical reasons, as I understand it. But she's very powerful, obviously, because of what has happened to her, and she's this powerful figure. And she said, "Oh, can I just speak on that, please? Can I jump in and talk?" And there's Farage going, "Yeah, absolutely." And she spoke, and he said, "Well, that was so powerful. Thank you so much." So of course he's got this image now of being the sort of adult figure, or the grown-up man-friendly figure who cares about young women my age and younger who have been abused. And I thought, how dare you be that, or portray yourself as this kind of fatherly figure to women who've experienced violence, when he's got the history of the party that he has. But other politicians aren't doing it.
Well, 1 in 5 of his party had been prosecuted. This one of the bit that frustrates me about this is very much it gets misconstrued when people raise the racism that exists in the parts of the movement that are raising issues of violence against women and girls, because they portray you as saying, well, you don't care about the grooming gangs. Yeah. Well, that's not the case at all, right? No. Everybody, I think anyone with a conscience cares about this horrific crime and that it should be dealt with. But if the filter in your mind about whether caring about violence against women and girls goes through the filter of, is the perpetrator black or brown or trans or migrant, then I care, then that's the problem. Because one of the best examples this week, or this last month, a woman was raped in a sort of, I think it's now confirmed by police, it's a racially aggravated case, both in Oldbury and another case recently.
Two Sikh women, I believe.
Two Sikh women. Yeah. I haven't heard Farage talk about that.
No.
I haven't heard Tommy Robinson talk about that. I haven't heard any of these UKIP lot or this far-right protesters talk about that. If you care about violence against women and girls, you care about either all violence against women and girls, or you don't care at all.
And they, of course, would turn around to those on the left and say, well, you never talk about, foreign nationals who... So I think we have to strike that balance. I did some interviews at the Tommy Robinson March, and there was a particular interview with a younger guy, and I was interviewing him, and he was stood next to somebody who he'd never met before, but was a fellow protester, an older gentleman. And he said to me, we were talking about violence against women and girls, and he went, "No British man would ever rape a woman." Wow. And I just paused, and I looked to the man stood next to him, and he sort of shook his head and went, "Well, no, that's not true. Actually, we have our own rapists." And the young lad was like, "Oh, I didn't know that." And he sort of laughed and he went, "You learn something new every day." And it was unfathomable to me. And to this guy's credit, he stepped in and sort of corrected that record, but then went on to say, but that's why we need to deal with our own rapists first. We can't be importing other rapists. And the fact that this guy was so unaware of the fact that any white British person was capable of sexual assault it really astounded me.
And I think as well, the thing that we're skirting around a little bit is this whole idea of a perfect victim as well, because one of the things that when people talk about the grooming gangs, they're very, very keen to talk about the identity of the perpetrators. But what we talk about less is the identity of the victims. Yeah. And when you look at their experiences, because very often they were in care, or they had addiction issues, or they came from very low income families, and even the police were using words like slags to describe them, and some are now reporting that the police were complicit in and participated in their abuse. But we never talk about why girls and women like that are more likely to be targeted and less likely to be believed.
Yeah, and this is one of the issues where so I understand there's loads of different conversations at the moment about what the grooming gangs inquiry should encapsulate. Should it just be grooming, some victims say, yes, it should just focus on the grooming gangs. Others say it should include different forms of child abuse. I can see the arguments for both sides in that. But if you're focusing on victims who end up being groomed by gangs and trafficked by gangs often come from backgrounds, as you said, where they have been abused at home. So do you mean to tell me that this grooming gang inquiry will only look at the element that is trafficking and involving gang-related sexual abuse, but ignoring the pathway, as it were, into getting involved in that? And it's something that we discuss on the podcast about Charlene, who was called a prostitute by police and the press at the time.
It's probably a good point to start talking about your podcast, actually, because it sounds really relevant, and obviously you've been working on it for 3 years, which is extraordinary. Tell us a bit more about it, and I particularly want to know, has it changed your view on the way society treats women?
Yeah, massively. I mean, gosh, the main sort of takeaway that I have from the whole series is that when there is a void, either when there is a void in a case or when there's a void in a narrative, bad actors will jump in and fill that void. And in Charlene's case, she's never been found. Her body's never been found. And in the absence of those answers, other characters will come in and say, we think this is what happened to her, or they will spin that story to tell a particular narrative that they want to tell. I interviewed Tommy Robinson as part of the series. It wasn't something I planned to do, but he was there at one of the memorials for Charlene's disappearance, and I spoke to him, and probably that was a real moment for me, because for the first time I could understand his appeal. And bear with me, I know what Tommy Robinson's about, but standing there in that service, I looked around and was like, okay, he's the only kind of popular or famous figure here. And he actually reached out to the family when she disappeared all those years ago and said, look, I want to support you with financially, with your campaign. We will talk about Charlene. We will make sure she gets justice. Because no one else was. And could you really blame a family who had lost their daughter and didn't know where she was for accepting help from a person like that? And I also have seen throughout making the series, people didn't want to talk about it for different reasons. I'm from Blackpool. I'm very proud of my hometown. I wouldn't have made this story, believe it or not, if I wasn't proud of it, because I do think that it needs to kind of shine a light on what happened to Charlene, not to show all of the shit parts of Blackpool, but to show the incredible people who are there as well, and how we can hopefully change their outcomes. But yeah, I'll be forever changed by what I read in some of these police reports, some of the abuse that these girls were subjected to. And also the justice system. I mean, Christ, one man admitted to police the abuse that he'd done to Charlene in great detail. He'd done a written statement of what he'd done to her and the ways in which he'd sexually abused her. But because he wasn't read his rights before he signed that witness statement, it was inadmissible in court. And there are so many parts of this series where you look at the justice system and you go, God, it's just... But it's all we've got. What do you say to women? What do you say to abuse victims of any kind? You know, don't report it. No, you if you're able to, then please do. But also understand that the system is so imperfect.
I guess the bit that's... I mean, I will be listening to the series hopefully on the plane tomorrow.
Amazing.
But what sends like shivers down your spine is everything you're saying is still happening. Nothing's changed. When did Charlene disappear?
2003.
We're 22 years later.
22 years.
Nothing's
so it's
changed.
Yeah, it's the anniversary.
Like, the way you're talking about the way the police described her.
Yeah.
Or the way that the police... We've had a bunch of Met police officers having to resign because that's how they were talking about victims
precisely.
now.
It's still as relevant as ever. And it's a case that I think for lots of different reasons people brush under the carpet because they go, oh, well, it involves the far right and it involves foreign-born nationals who did abuse her. So we feel a bit uncomfortable about bringing that up. And I think that, you know, across parties, across the left and the right, we have to agree that all of these stories need to be told. Because if not, we're siloed, like you say, into two teams. Either we only care about white abusers or we only care about foreign-born abusers. We should be, as wherever possible, talking about all of it and both, and really focusing on the victims at the centre of it.
And I think you're right, because otherwise we cede that ground to the far right. As you say, they will sweep up survivors' families, victims' families, and say, we'll put our arm around you, we'll care about you.
With great success. They do it.
And because they've done it, as we were saying, it's an old as time mechanism that they use. It's their MO.
And like, look, all it needs is, not talking about grooming now, but talking about, say, you know, the far right telling people how dangerous people are in asylum hotels. You just have to look at 2 stories in the past week. The one of the asylum seeker who killed the woman who was working at the hotel, and then he wasn't an asylum seeker, but oh no, he wasn't staying at an asylum hotel, but the guy who stabbed 3 people yesterday, killing one of them in Uxbridge. All it takes is for somebody to read that, you know, someone will hear a left winger like ourselves saying, you know, the problem is in that direction, the problem is in that direction. But then they see those 2 stories in the news and they become radicalised from 2 stories in and of themselves. And in a way, who could blame them? Because on the right-hand side of things, everyone on the right is saying the people on the left are not discussing this. And we know that we are, but it's not portrayed to them that we are. So I think in a way, the left need to do more of talking about.
I want to ask you guys one question as a guy. What should we be doing more on this issue? And then a separate question generally. I mean, we've identified problems, but what do we need to do? Like,
guys need to buy women more stuff. I think that's where I've landed on generally. Just presents, gifts.
I'll take that away.
I actually have an ask for men. Stop playing devil's advocate
Yes.
when women tell you things.
Yeah.
That drives me
Insane.
mad. Well, yeah, but maybe no. It doesn't matter. You've all had your opportunity to play devil's advocate. Now just listen.
Yeah. So why should people? We always like to end these things hopefully or positively. What reasons give you hope on this issue? I mean, other than you 3.
Other than us.
Because I do like. I'll be honest. Like on my we see each other either in the studios or Zoe and I see each other about once a week. But I do follow you guys at stuff, and I go. I take a lot of my lines from you guys, right? So because whether we admit it to ourselves or not, like the positions we take on things are influenced by people that we trust and we believe in.
Yes,
right.
Absolutely.
So, as like down as you can get sometimes, like a post that you guys put, any 3 of you will put out, will make me think about something.
So what you're saying is that you owe us commission for some.
She's going to buy us stuff. I actually
I think it's time to bring.
I actually do have a quick reason to be cheerful.
Yeah.
Lily Allen's new album.
Oh, incredible.
I think
Who's
the
that?
fact. I will tell you after the show.
That wasn't it. I don't know.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But the fact that women are, I think women are increasingly being given visibility for that kind of art, which is punchy and powerful and holds no prisoners and says what they mean and really does take the female experience and that female rage and put it out there in a way that is artistic and well received. And I do think we are more receptive to messier female artists, and I think that is a good thing because having those stories told is part of the female experience.
Yeah.
I'm cheerful all the time because I work with young people. I mean, I'm in 2 or 3 schools a week, and they are wonderful. They have their problems, and their problems are reported on and I think sometimes magnified. But you will never walk away from spending time with a group of teenagers without a smile on your face. Like it'll be all right, I think.
Yeah.
Cheerful. Oh, I'm going to have to dig deep for this one. Okay, a lot of the vox pops that I've done recently at a lot of these far-right protests and riots, I think my mind has been changed about a lot of the people there. And I felt, yes, disheartened by the message and the group organisers and the people leading these events, but hopeful about the fact that the majority of people there, when you really drill down on it, don't actually agree with what is being said by the leaders of those groups. What I feel disheartened about is how we engage those people and bring them over, as it were, to our side. But it has left me feeling hopeful. And again, I can say that as a white woman, you know, I'm not being judged or scared in the same way as a person of colour would be having these interviews. But it did give me a sense of hope that it was like, oh, I don't think a lot of these people are as far gone as the papers might have you believe. I think there's room for, I don't want to patronise anyone by saying, you know, education. I don't mean that in a patronising way. I just mean in a kind of outreach and a human level. I don't think all is lost.
All right. Thank you guys for listening to another episode of the Politics of Podcast. Thank you to our wonderful guests. Thanks to Zoe. This has been amazing. Make sure you comment, like, subscribe, drop your views. and I'll either share it with you guys if it's good. If it's not, I'm not going to share. Thank you for listening to the Politics of Podcast. I've been Ali Milani.
And I've been Zoe Grunewald.